Does that make sense? Learning styles, that's right. So if you go through and you look at it in a way that is different from how you were taught it, then you can probably find some new ways to teach it so that your struggling students pick it up. Does that make sense? You have to remember in education that really it's kind of like, if you want to look at it this way, about 80% of your salary, and I know our salaries aren't that high, but still, 80% of your salary really comes from helping the students that struggle. And here's why. The students that are good, I hate to say this, guys, it's kind of nasty to say, but it's a fact. The students that are good will figure it out without you. To be honest with you. You don't need to be there. I don't need to be here for the students that already have all this figured out. Does that make sense? Okay? Because the students that are good, they can sort it out on their own. Now, are you able to help them? Can you make them get better? Can you make them go from a 90 to a 93? You can't. But there are differences you can make with a student that is strong are little differences. But imagine the differences you can make with a student that is weak. Look at a Jaime Escalante, who went into a school district in South Central Los Angeles where every student figured they were a loser and a failure, and he put some of those students on a track to become leaders in the field of mathematics and science in the United States, and some of those students are still leaders. Look at the difference that Jaime Escalante made. And every one of you guys, because of the schools you're in, are in the same kind of position that Escalante was in. So we need to think about that. We're really here for those students that learn differently from how we were taught. For those students that struggle, that's why we're here. Does that make sense? I don't think I'm overstating the case. I don't think I am. All right? So we look at the other thing. What else is here? Math. Teach at a lower level. You know, people laughed, but the truth is that's actually quite a smart strategy. Right? Because you're saying, I'm actually not capable, and you know, that's a good way when you say, okay, so I'm going to start with the basics. Yeah? It kind of ties in to the last idea. Learn basic skills and practice them first. We forget about that. You know, here's the interesting thing. I've seen struggling students in math. And actually, I kind of fit this because I was a lousy math student in high school, and I was a lousy math student in elementary. I was a lousy math student all the way through until I actually got to university, and I got this wonderful teacher who, of course, who followed the advice of teaching differently from how he was taught. He knew how to get the information into your mind in different ways, right? So I was lousy all the way through. And when I see struggling math students, I've worked with a lot of students that have a lot of trouble in math, okay? And what you find is the basic skills are not there. They're not there. The student, for example, is in 6th grade, and they can't do multiplication. So guess what? They're going to struggle with all these equations and algebraic things you start throwing at them in 7th, 8th, to 9th grade because the basic skills aren't there. So if you teach them techniques to learn and improve in basic skills, they will naturally improve in their ability to pick up in other areas. It'll happen, right? Does that make sense? So these strategies, this is why he suggests this. To be honest with you, I don't think that Postman really actually believes that we should take all the textbooks and throw them in the clown or burn them all. I don't think that he necessarily believes that we should always have students telling us every error we make so that we can't teach a class because we're interrupted 300 times. I don't think that he actually believes that we should take every teacher and put them in a class that they're not very good at teaching. But it's a mindset. Does that make sense? It's a way of looking at it, which will have tremendous impact. Mark, you wanted to comment, so please do.
Yes. First of all, this technique in psychology is called flooding. You know, having a negative students that you're really frightened of, you know, throwing you in the same room with the negative students, which works in a way. Sometimes works, sometimes doesn't work. But in my opinion, I disagree with it. I mean, this bubble. The reason is, I mean, when you took it, like right now, the way we look at it is like we are teaching it as a brand new thing. Whereas what I usually get, and I think that it's shared as a common experience with other people here, is someone who has already had problems in the past with a topic, with a subject, right? And I made some notes here. Number one, I believe that there is a difference in IQs. Not everyone is going to become a rocket scientist. People will not go down the path of maths. The reason why is that they had used traumatic maths while they were going through. I mean, they didn't understand it. It wasn't explained to them properly. They couldn't with their self-esteem and negative memory imprint about it, and they simply avoid it as much as possible. So I believe that, you know, okay, this is fine for something right now, but in the past, it's all what happened, why they started, why they went down the path of avoiding. You go back to that, you know, fork in the road, and then undo what was done from there. That's what I would do.
What you're suggesting is actually a psychoanalytical sort of approach, or psychological approach, and which probably, well, not probably will work, works. The challenge with it is that most teachers in a class of 25 students, or 30, or even 50 or 60 in some cases here, probably don't get that opportunity to work at that level with all their students. But, and again, I don't necessarily, I don't think this is something that you would actually do in a lot of cases because of what you just said. And I don't think that Postman intends for these strategies to actually implement it for the reasons that you're saying. But I think what he's trying to do is get people to look at the paradigm differently. Get people to look outside of their comfort zone. If you think of this, go back to when you spent that minute, right? And I made you, it wasn't an actual minute, it was actually a little bit longer than a minute, about a minute and a half. And if you probably thought, you probably accessed some of the same discomfort that Mark's talking about, right? Did some of you got inside? You don't have to necessarily put your hands up, but I see some heads nodding, I see some reactions telling me, yeah, right? So, when you go to that and you say, okay, even given that, how would I get this information across? Right? It's a bit uncomfortable, but it's likely to give you, and it did give you, some ideas that will be extremely valuable in teaching. Remember Dean Rojek from last week that said that what we have to do, and he was talking about upper education or higher education, but actually it's true at any level, is we have to find ways to reach the students that are struggling. Right? Because again, the strong students will probably figure it out. Does that make sense? Most of what it is, most of what we're doing is finding, now I'm not saying we just blow off the top, I'm not saying that, please don't interpret it that way. We want to help everybody, but the ones we often lose are the ones that are struggling. So these are ways of maybe implementing Dean Rojek's vision. Does that make sense? Are we okay with that? Okay. Let's try to continue with some of this. Thank you for that comment, Mark. That was very valuable. Let's just sort of look through I want to look through a few key themes here. I want to talk about an idea from Tom Peters in connection with some of this. Okay, so I'm just going to put the name up in case some of you are not familiar with him. I suggest it may be valuable to pick up some of his work. Some of it's kind of weighty and long, but he uses fairly common language to describe things. So it's just a lot of material to get through in his books. His books tend to be quite long. But what you can do if you want to take a shortcut is you can look at prescriptions that he has in there, or he has action steps, that kind of thing. But I recommend the work of Tom Peters. He's a management consultant, but a lot of his ideas apply to anything. Sort of particular books that would have value, I think, in education would be In Search of Excellence, or Thriving on Chaos. There's a number of other books. Passion for Excellence. But one of the things that Tom Peters says is he says, after he talks about this, all of his stuff is in a business context, but a lot of it applies to education. He said, you've gone through and you've got all your ideas lined up, and you think you figured out everything perfect. What you should do in business, this is, but I think this probably works in education too, is you should find somebody that hates everything you stand for, that disagrees with everything, right? And you should hire that person, right? And then put them on your payroll and ask them for their opinion on just about everything.
Yes.
And he says, he goes further, and there's another guy who writes about the same idea. It's not Peters, but it's connected. It's Brian Tracy. And Brian Tracy says the secret to success in business, but you could also say in education, is to become a negative thinker. And he says a negative thinker, because a positive thinker looks for what will work, right? But a negative thinker says, that's not going to work because of this, 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 and this. He says, so what you do is you find somebody that's a bit of a negative thinker, and you listen to all the questions they have, and that's going to be probably the areas you need to work on. Does that make any sense? Okay, so if you look at this from a teaching standpoint, because that's sort of our primary issue here, if you get people that don't think the same way you do, and you listen to some of what they have to say, that's why I said, I find it, I'm very happy to have Mark in here. Okay, and David in here. And they're not the only ones. Marcin sometimes comes in with something. And there's other people. And I think that's wonderful. Because I know I don't have all the answers. And I know, frankly, that sometimes I'm way off on stuff. And some of you guys, you know, you're just too, you know, gang shy, you're just too polite, you know, you might even see it and not, oh, I don't want to say anything to John, you know. But I actually like that. Why? Because I'm well aware that I've got a lot of shortcomings. Right? So, in education, in teaching, you want to find people that actually will pick those things out. That's why Peter said that. Okay? So, you might say, you know, in teaching, if your administrator comes in and gives you a bunch of criticisms, you should actually welcome it. It's actually a positive thing. I mean, to be honest with you, I've had administrators come in, and it's nice, it makes you feel good, you know, but they sort of say, you know, they write an assessment on you, and basically the assessment says, this man walks on water without knowing where the stones are. And you might say, what does that mean? Well, actually, I know sister definitely understands that joke, because if you go to Christian traditions, Jesus Christ walked across the water, right? Because there were people in a boat that were scared, and he walked across the water, and he gave them something to eat, and so on, and he settled down the waters, right? But see, now Jesus Christ could do some pretty special things. But most people, if you want to walk on the water, you need to know where the stones are. Okay, there's a rock here, there's a rock here. So if somebody writes you an assessment that says you walk on water without knowing where the stones are, it's like saying you're perfect. Nobody's perfect. Okay? To be honest with you, sometimes in assessments, I appreciate the principals that do this, is they know that, you know, because if it goes in your file, everybody needs to have something good in their file. Nobody wants something bad in their file. So if Mike is doing a great job as a teacher, you know, and maybe Loyal is his principal, you know, Loyal's going to go in and give him a good assessment to put on his file, right? Because he needs that. He needs to have that on his file. But then maybe he'll talk to him after over a cup of coffee and say, now, you're doing a great job, no question about it. But here's some things you can work on. Does that make sense? Here's some things where you can improve. What is he doing? He's giving him what he needs professionally. Because unfortunately in teaching, you know, it doesn't work very good if you put all the weaknesses down to somebody and put it in their file, it's going to hurt their job prospects. You don't want to do that. That's not what this is about. It's about helping them get better. So, you write a fairly strong assessment. Does that make sense? But then you tell them some of the challenges. That's good. That's great if people do that. It's not dishonest. It's recognizing that there's a certain, you know, you don't give a guy a bad assessment that's going to hurt his career. That's not the point. Right? But you give him assistance that he needs to get better. We should be doing that. Okay? You don't necessarily have to write it down. You can do it verbally. Or you can write it down informally. I've had teachers ask me, come in, observe my class, tell me what I can do better. You do it. Do it with a colleague. Right? So this idea, I think, has value to it. Peter's idea has value to it. These things apply. Okay? Let me flip ahead. I'm going to get you into another activity in a minute here, because you need to be doing something that's not just listening to me. If you have the pages with you, that's okay. If you don't, okay, that's okay too. I'm going to read something to you, and I'm going to ask you to do something. Okay, it's on page 117 at the bottom. Okay? And I actually think this is very valuable. But again, if people don't agree, that's okay. You can challenge it. Okay? We already had one challenge tonight. That's good. If we have more, I'll be happy. He writes this as an example of what you can do with your students. It says, I'm going to read this. During this term, I will be doing a great deal of talking. That's what happened, right? Doing a great deal of talking. Okay. I will be giving lectures, answering questions, and conducting discussions. That's what we're doing, isn't it? Since I am an imperfect scholar, there you go. This could be me saying this. This is all true. Imperfect scholar, and even more certainly, a fallible human being. I will inevitably be making factual errors, drawing some unjustifiable conclusions, and perhaps passing along my opinions as facts. Not intentionally, but we all do that, right? Some do it intentionally.